Popcorn has been a popular snack food since long before Columbus came to America. Corn is also fed to cattle and pigs for beef and pork production. But increasingly, corn is also used to produce ethanol, an additive to gasoline and an alternative fuel for cars. Farmers in every state except Alaska and Hawaii grow large quantities of corn. We grow lots of corn even here in Colorado. Between the years 2005 and 2008, though, something big happened with corn. Its price tripled from about $2 per bushel to more than $6 a bushel. As a result, farmers found it more profitable to grow corn than other crops. Many farmers stopped growing wheat and instead planted corn. Some plots of land that were not being used to grow crops were planted with corn seed. In addition, farmers applied more fertilizer to existing cornfields and used better seeds to increase their yields. All these efforts caused the quantity of corn supplied in the market to increase by 25% in just a few years. This and the next three modules will explain how the price, along with things such as improved production methods, affect the availability of a good like corn. As the price of fancy coffee drinks has increased, so has their availability. The caffeine craze fueled by Starbucks has brought in Caribou Coffee, Gimme Coffee, Biggby Coffee, Dazbog Coffee, and hundreds of others. Even McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts now sell premium coffee. Low prices have the opposite effect. For example, as the prices paid for homes fall, so does the quantity supplied by construction companies. To examine the relationship between prices and the quantity offered for sale is to study what we call supply. In this module, we explore the supply decisions of firms. So the key idea that you need to focus on throughout this module is that producers, those who make our goods and services, respond to price changes just like we saw with the law of demand that consumers respond to price changes. And when prices change, producers offer more goods for sale when prices increase and fewer goods when prices decrease. And we'll look at why this is so. So the first thing I will do is explain the concept of supply and the law of supply. Then I will explain the relationship between a supply schedule and a supply curve, just like we looked at the relationship between a demand schedule and a demand curve in the last section. And then we will wrap up this module by identifying the factors that cause the quantity supplied to be more or less responsive to price changes, what we call the elasticity of supply. So let's get started. The owners of most firms want to make as much profit as possible. You are trying to make as much profit as possible for your school in the high school food court project. Well, what is profit? Profit is the total revenue a firm receives from selling its product minus the total cost of producing it. We're going to see how managers can maximize profit by using information on price and production costs to determine how much of their product to put up for sale. Initially, we'll make the assumption that production costs remain unchanged and focus how price changes influence what we call the quantity supplied. To economists, that term quantity supplied means the quantity of a good or service that firms would be willing to sell at a particular price over a given period of time, such as a day. The quantity supplied of bottled drinking water, for example, is the number of bottles firms would make available for sale each day at a particular price. The quantity supplied is measured in physical units, which could be bottles, gallons, bushels, slices, or pounds, depending on the good. So what exactly is the law of supply? Well, just like we had a law of demand, we have a law of supply. And in general, as shown in the figure in front of you, if the price of a good rises, then the quantity supplied by firms will increase. If the price falls, the quantity supplied by firms will decrease. This tendency for the price and the quantity supplied to move in the same direction is known as the law of supply. For example, if we look at a price of $2 per bottle, firms in the United States produce and sell about 85 million bottles of water each day. Now, if they could receive $3 per bottle, they would be willing to produce more, perhaps 100 million bottles. Now, why is it that firms are willing to produce more of a good when its price rises? That is because as production increases, the cost of making each additional unit generally rises. So it takes a higher price to cover the higher cost of making additional units. Now you might wonder, well, why is that so? Why doesn't it cost the same amount to make each additional unit of a good? Why does it cost more to make each additional unit? Well, imagine you're in the business of making skateboards by hand. You can produce more skateboards each day by spending more of your time making them. Now, as you devote more time to production, the opportunity cost of your time increases because you must give up increasingly important activities in your day. You can make one skateboard in the time you would otherwise spend watching TV reruns. Making a second skateboard would take up your study time. Making a third would cause you to lose several hours of sleep. You might make one skateboard for a low price, but you would require a higher price in exchange for the higher opportunity costs of making the second and third skateboards. Later in this module, we'll discuss why the cost of making additional units of a good tends to rise, even if new workers are hired to carry out the production. So, when does the law of supply apply? Well, soon you will see that many factors affect the supply of a good. These factors include input costs, government policies, and production methods. Like the law of demand, the law of supply applies under the ceteris paribus condition, that these other influences remain unchanged when the price of the good changes. If there are changes in these other influences, you might mistakenly think you see violations of the law of supply all the time. Suppose, for example, you observe that the price of skateboards is higher this year than last year, and yet fewer skateboards are available for sale this year. This would not be a violation of the law of supply if the price of plywood increased over the same period, or if new government regulations required costly safety inspections of each skateboard, thus increasing the cost of production. The law of supply applies in the hypothetical situation in which the price of skateboards changes, but there is no other change in the price of plywood, the existence of regulations, or any other influence on supply. Now, as you can see here, the supply schedule is a table that lists the quantity supplied at specific prices. This right here is the supply schedule for General Gasoline. To construct a supply schedule for a particular firm, we would ask, if the price were $1 this week, how many units would you supply? If the price were $2, how many units would you supply? And so on. So let's now consider the quantity of gasoline supplied by a hypothetical firm that we will call General Gasoline. This company refines crude oil and produces gasoline for service stations around the country. For the purposes of this example, we will suppose that General Gasoline faces many competitors selling identical gasoline. This table is a supply schedule for General Gasoline. At a price of $1.50 per gallon right there, the firm is unwilling to produce any gasoline at all. But if we go to a price of $1, or if we go up in price, the firm would rather shut down its refinery. Now, at a price of $2, General Gasoline is willing to produce and sell 5,000 gallons of gasoline per week. Now, what if the price was to rise to $2.50? You can see there, they would be now willing to sell 10,000 gallons, and so on. The supply schedule lists the amount of gasoline the company would offer for sale at various prices. The supply curve for a firm is a graphical representation. The supply curve for a firm is a graphical representation of the supply schedule, showing the quantity supplied at each price. So let's now look at the supply curve for General Gasoline. And this is shown in the figure that the arrow is pointing to. And it's based on the same information in the supply schedule. In this example, the supply curve is a straight line. You can see that right here. It's a straight line. But as with the demand curve, the supply curve can be straight or it can be curved. Now, the vertical axis of the supply curve, right here, indicates the price of each unit of the good. So we always measure price on the y-axis. In this example, it measures the price per gallon of gasoline. The horizontal axis, however, measures the quantity of the good, the gallons of gasoline in this case. The supply curve shows the amount the producer is willing to sell at each price. Now notice that the supply curve slopes upward from left to right. That's the opposite of what we saw with demand, which was sloping downward from left to right. The upward slope of the supply curve is a graphical representation of the law of supply that you learned about earlier. At a higher price, the company is willing to supply more gasoline, and at a lower price, it will supply less gasoline. So far, we have considered the supply curve of just one firm, General Gasoline. However, as in most cases, many firms supply the same good. The market supply curve, as shown here, is a graphical representation of the quantity supplied at various prices by all firms in the market. To determine the market supply schedule and draw the associated market supply curve, we add up the quantity supplied by each firm in the market. So notice it is the sum of these two individual supply curves, the supply curve for General Gasoline and the supply curve for National Gasoline. Now, this shows the supply schedule for each of these firms. So here we see the quantity of gallons of gasoline that would be supplied by General Gasoline. This is the quantity of gallons supplied by National Gasoline. And so we see their two individual supply schedules. Now, what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that at a price of $2.50, General Gasoline would be willing to sell 10,000 gallons of gasoline. At the same price, however, National Gasoline would supply more. They would be willing to supply 12,000 gallons. And that is shown by point B, right here. The General Gasoline supply would be right here, point A. The total quantity supplied to the market, however, at a price of $2.50 would thus be 10,000 plus 12,000, and that would equal 22,000 gallons of gasoline. And that's indicated by point C on the market supply curve in panel C, right there. Now, notice that the market supply curve, just like the supply curve for each individual firm, obeys the law of supply. That is, when the price rises, the quantity supplied to the market rises. For example, as the price rises from $2 to $2.50 per gallon, the quantity supplied to the market rises from 11,000 to 22,000 gallons. And as with the demand curve, a rise in the price does not cause the supply curve itself to move. Instead, it causes a movement along the supply curve to a new point on the same curve. Notice we haven't shifted the curve. We're just going from one point to another point on the same curve. Some types of markets have no supply curve because the relationship between the price and the quantity supplied changes when demand changes. For example, this is the case for a monopoly, as will be discussed in a later chapter. Supply schedules and curves, as discussed in this module, exist under what we call conditions of perfect competition. There is perfect competition among firms in a market when four conditions are met. And you can see those here. They are selling identical goods. Firms are free to enter and exit the market. and consumers have full information about the price and availability of goods. So, the first condition is this one. Every unit of the goods sold in the market is identical, regardless of which firm is selling it. Secondly, the good is produced by many firms, none of which is large enough to influence the price of the good. Third, new firms that want to supply the good are free to enter the market, and existing firms that want to stop supplying it are free to exit the market. And four, consumers are aware of the price charged by the various firms and have the opportunity to buy from whichever firm they choose. When all four of these conditions are present in the market, we say that this is a perfectly competitive market, and perfect competition exists. Now, when that does exist, individual firms have no control over the price of the good. If one firm tries to charge a higher price than other firms, it will not make any sales at all. Its customers will be able to buy from the competitors who sell the exact same identical good at a lower price. Why would you pay even 1 penny more for a good that is identical to a good at a lower price? Perfect competition drives the price down until a lower price would prevent the firms from covering their costs. This removes any temptation for a firm to charge less than the price charged by the other firms in the market, which is known as the market price. Because if they did charge less, they wouldn't cover their cost of production and they would actually lose money. Since firms in a perfectly competitive market simply accept the market price as given, we call them price takers. The conditions required for perfect competition are simplifications of reality. Few markets really, truly meet these conditions, yet they permit us to make useful economic models that resemble reality and provide a reference point from which to compare other types of markets. Examples of goods that are supplied under conditions that come close to perfect competition include agricultural products such as wheat, corn, and cotton, because one farmer's wheat is pretty much identical to another farmer's wheat, and the same thing is true with corn and cotton. These goods are similar regardless of which farm supplies them, and they are produced by thousands of farms.